I'll come by in the evening for the money. Don't dare go anywhere, my son called me. He took half of my pension every month. But when he entered the apartment and saw who was sitting at the table, he nearly collapsed. The phone ring cut through the silence of the apartment, making Margaret flinch. She knew who it was even before looking at the screen. Her fingers tightened on the soft fabric of her apron, leaving damp imprints. Fear now came before her son's voice. At the very first notes of the phone ring. I'll come by in the evening for the money. Don't dare go anywhere. Tyler's voice sounded harsher than usual, with notes of new, unfamiliar panic. Before, he would at least ask how she was feeling. He asked insincerely, not listening to the answer, but he still asked. Now, even that formality had disappeared. All right, son, Margaret answered quietly, feeling a lump rising in her throat. Tyler hung up without saying goodbye. The dial tone sounded like mockery of all the years when she taught him manners. Always say goodbye, Tyler. It's a sign of respect. He would nod then. A 6-year-old boy with an unruly cowlick on the crown of his head and trusting eyes. She put down the phone and slowly sank into a chair at the kitchen table. 72 years old, and she was still afraid of angering her own son. What a humiliating admission. Once Margaret had been the one others were afraid to anger. Don't upset Mum, Robert would tell the children when they misbehaved too much. And they obeyed, knowing her strictness and fairness. Now fear had changed masters. Oliver, a black and white cat, jumped onto her lap and meowed demandingly. The only creature that didn't demand anything from her except a bowl of food and occasionally affection. She got him 6 months after Robert's death, when the silence in the apartment became unbearable. At least you never ask for more than I can give, she whispered, stroking the soft fur. What would Robert say if he saw what their son had become? In their last conversation, when Robert was already struggling to speak after his first stroke, he squeezed her hand and whispered, Take care of the children, Maggie, but yourself too. Back then she didn't understand, thought he was delirious. Now those words returned to her, taking on a new, bitter meaning. Sighing heavily, she reached for the orange pill bottles lined up by the coffee maker. Morning dose, 6 colourful pills. Margaret took only 3. The rest could be taken in the evening or tomorrow. She needed to stretch out the supply. After swallowing the pills, she took out a worn notebook, her expense diary. The figures in neat columns stubbornly refused to add up, no matter how she juggled them. Electricity, $72. Gas, $45. Medicine, $183. The pen froze over the last amount. She would have to economize on food again. Or maybe postpone buying new glasses, though the old ones were held together on the bridge of her nose only by tape. Once she had kept accounts for the small construction company where Robert worked. She expertly juggled numbers, found hidden reserves, planned the budget for a quarter ahead. Now she struggled for every dollar of her own pension. The pension arrived on the 3rd day of each month. Tyler appeared on her doorstep on the 5th. Like clockwork, as if he knew the exact time the money arrived. Maybe he did. She wouldn't be surprised to learn that he had, somehow, gained access to her bank statements. The clock on the wall, Robert's gift for their 30th wedding anniversary, showed 9 in the morning. There were many hours left until Tyler's visit, but anxiety had already coiled like a cold snake in her stomach. She looked at the small calendar pinned to the wall. Today was the 5th. With a heavy sigh, Margaret stood up and headed to the bedroom. The floorboards creaked quietly under her steps, the only sound in the silence of the apartment. She knew exactly which boards made a sound and which didn't. She had learned to walk silently when Robert was sick and needed rest. Now this habit remained, though there was no one left to protect. The old wardrobe creaked when she opened the door. Pushing aside a stack of neatly folded sweaters, She pulled out a tin cookie box, the last reminder of the Christmas they had all celebrated together, before Jessica stopped coming, before that strange hunted look appeared in Tyler's eyes. Inside, $340, all she had managed to save over 6 months. A rainy day, as Robert used to say. He was a master at saving for a rainy day. Life is unpredictable, Maggie. You need to be prepared for anything. After his death, she discovered a small sum in the bank that she hadn't known about. That money was enough for his funeral, with a little left over. The memory of his foresight comforted her in difficult moments. She hid the tin back and closed the wardrobe. Truth can be painful, Maggie, but lies are always poison, Robert used to say. What would he say now? What would he do if he knew how their son treated her? Robert was a gentleman, but uncompromising in matters of family. Once, when Tyler was 16 and came home drunk, Robert locked him in his room for the entire weekend. A man must be responsible for his actions, he said then. Tyler raged, shouted, promised to leave home forever. But then he gave in, apologized, and never came home intoxicated again while living with them. Margaret sat in an armchair, trying to remember when everything changed. 2 years ago. Yes, that when. After the divorce from Karen? After she took little Lily and moved to the suburbs? Margaret didn't blame her daughter-in-law. She had endured for too long. Margaret herself had seen signs that something was wrong in her son's life, but didn't want to interfere. Adults will sort things out themselves, she told Robert when he expressed concern. Now she regretted her blindness. Tyler came to her pale, with a bruise under his eye and poorly concealed panic in his gaze. "Mum, I'm in trouble," he said then, not looking her in the eyes. "I need money. I can't tell you what for." She remembered that day so well. A light drizzle was falling, and Tyler came in a completely soaked jacket. Although he had a car, why was he walking in the rain? That question didn't occur to her then, but now she often returned to it. Maybe he was hiding his car, afraid someone was following him? She gave him everything she had in the house, $200 from her bathroom renovation fund. It wasn't enough. He returned a week later, then 3 days after that. With each visit, his demands grew, and his explanations became more vague. "Karen wants to take away my parental rights," he complained. "She hired lawyers, demands huge alimony. She's taking revenge for that stupid office affair." But when Margaret offered to talk to Karen, to mediate, he flared up. "Don't you dare interfere. You'll only make things worse." It was the first time in his life he raised his voice at her. She was so shocked that she couldn't find a response. And then it became too late. He got used to speaking to her in that tone. Months of persistent questioning yielded only fragments of truth. "Oh, the wrong people. They won't wait. I have no choice, Mum." Now the same ritual repeated every month. The call short and sharp. A visit during which Tyler nervously paced around the apartment, checking windows and looking out at the street, money passing from her trembling hands to his sweaty palms. And the relief in his eyes, lasting no longer than a minute before returning to constant fear. Once, she saw Tyler talking to some man in the parking lot near the house. Tall, in an expensive suit with a gold chain around his neck. Margaret watched from the window as the stranger handed her son an envelope, and he, in return, extended bills, the same ones she had given him the day before. It wasn't a debt payment, as Tyler had claimed. It was a transaction, a purchase. A sharp pain in the left side of her chest interrupted her thoughts. Margaret pressed her hand to her heart and tried to take a deep breath. She couldn't, as if a stone slab was pressing on her chest. She reached for her pills, but the nitroglycerin bottle was empty. "Calm down," she thought. "Just anxiety. It will pass." She tried to remember the breathing exercises the doctor had mentioned. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. But concentration slipped away, and the pain didn't subside. On the contrary, it became sharper, spreading in waves from her heart to her shoulder and neck. But the pain intensified, spreading to her left arm and neck. It was joined by nausea. Black spots swam before her eyes. Margaret tried to stand, but her legs gave way, and she sank heavily back into the chair. This is really happening, the thought flashed. She had seen enough medical shows on television to understand the symptoms. A heart attack. Here it was, her rainy day, the day for which she had been saving money in a tin box. Money that wouldn't save her now, not even enough to call an ambulance. "Help me, Robert," she mentally called out, looking at her husband's photograph. But only he himself looked back from the photograph, silent and unreachable. How often in recent months she had talked to him, told him about her fears and doubts, imagined that he answered, gave advice. A small madness of a lonely old woman. But now even this imaginary presence dissolved in the approaching panic. With trembling hands, she fumbled for the phone on the bedside table. She needed to call... who? Tyler? No, he would be angry that she was distracting him from work. Jessica? But her daughter hadn't answered her calls for 3 years. The neighbour, Mrs. Parker. But she had moved in with her daughter a month ago, and the new tenants didn't even say hello when Margaret met them on the stairs. She dialed 911. Her own voice sounded alien, distant, as if someone else was speaking through her mouth. "Please, I feel bad, heart." "Stay on the line, ma'am. What's your address?" Margaret struggled to get the words out, feeling numbness spreading through the left side of her body. Each syllable required effort. Her lips wouldn't obey. "An ambulance is already on its way. Can you open the front door?" The front door. 2 locks and a chain. She always locked them, especially after Tyler started bringing strange people with him, supposedly colleagues. They examined the apartment with tenacious eyes, and Margaret felt uncomfortable in her own home. "I'm not sure." She tried to stand, but a body wouldn't obey. The room spun around her, objects losing their outlines. Margaret slid from the chair, trying to crawl to the door on all fours, but she only had enough strength to fall on the carpet, pressing her cheek against the cool pile. The last thing Margaret managed to think before consciousness faded was, what will happen to Oliver? A white ceiling with a crack resembling a spider, the measured beeping of machines, the smell of antiseptic. Hospital. Margaret slowly turned her head, wincing from the pain in her neck. A tube stretched to her arm from an IV on her chest, sensors recording her heartbeat. She was alive. This discovery brought neither relief nor joy, only bewilderment. Why was she here? What happened? Memory returned in fragments. She tried to sit up, but her whole body seemed to have turned to lead. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked. Margaret tried to lick them, but her tongue seemed too big for her mouth, unwieldy, foreign. The monitor's beeping increased, reflecting her growing anxiety. Where was her cat? Had anyone checked if the apartment door was locked? And the winter coat with the torn lining. She was going to mend it before the next cold season. It was strange. What you think about after an encounter with death. Not of great accomplishments and unfulfilled dreams, but of a torn coat lining and a locked door. "Ah, you're awake," a young nurse with bright red hair gathered in a bun smiled, checking the readings of the instruments. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Foster?" "Like I've been run over by a truck," croaked Margaret. Her throat stung as if she had been screaming for several hours. Had she been screaming? What happened? "Heart attack. Extensive. You were lucky to have called the ambulance in time. A little longer and we would have lost you." Lucky. A strange word for her situation. How could it be lucky when it brought her closer to the inevitable finale, to bills she couldn't pay, to the loss of the little she had left? Margaret tried to sit up, but her hands trembled and wouldn't hold her. Her body, once so obedient, now refused to follow the simplest commands. Humiliating helplessness. "Lie still." The nurse gently but firmly laid her back down. Her touch conveyed the habit of dealing with stubborn patients. The doctor will come soon. In the meantime, we'll give you another medication to reduce the risk of blood clots. Margaret watched as the nurse, whose badge read Anna, checked the IV, added something to the clear bag of fluid. She adjusted Margaret's pillow, not because it was part of her duties, but because she saw the discomfort. She wiped the patient's dry lips with a damp cloth, though no one would have noticed if she had done this or not. How long have I been here? Almost a day. You were brought in yesterday morning. It's about 10 now. I need to call my son. He'll be worried. Anna paused for a moment, as if choosing her words. Oh, don't worry. We contacted him through a number in your phone. He knows you're here. Margaret tensed, muscles already constrained by pain, cramped with anticipation. Did he come? A flash of something like embarrassment crossed the nurse's face, a quick shadow that she tried to hide with a professional smile. No, not yet, but I'm sure he'll appear soon. You rest. Margaret fell back against the pillows, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. Of course he didn't come. He was only interested in money, not in her. Anna, noticing her reaction, gently touched her hand. You know, sometimes it's hard for relatives to see loved ones in this condition, especially men. They find it easier to deal with practical matters than with emotions. Practical matters. She wondered what practical matters Tyler was dealing with now. Maybe figuring out how much he would get if she died, or searching her apartment for hidden money. The door opened, and a middle-aged woman with a folder in her hands entered the ward. The badge read Dr. Cassidy, Cardiology. Dark hair with streaks of grey, gathered in a strict knot, attentive eyes behind glasses. She looked tired but focused. Mrs. Foster, glad to see you conscious. I'm Dr. Cassidy. How are you feeling? Tired and strange. Margaret didn't know how else to describe this sensation, as if she were separated from herself by a thick layer of cotton. That's normal after such a serious attack. Tests show significant damage to the heart muscle. But what concerns me most are the signs of long-term hypertension and previous microinfarctions, which you seem to have endured. On your feet? The doctor sat on the edge of the bed and looked Margaret directly in the eyes. There was no judgment in this gaze, only professional concern, and something else, understanding, sympathy. Tell me honestly, were you taking your prescribed medications at the full dosage? Margaret looked away. She remembered her morning economy, 3 pills instead of 6. I tried, but they're so expensive. I stretched out the packages. Dr. Cassidy sighed heavily. She had probably heard similar stories dozens of times a day, elderly patients economizing on medications. No wonder the cardiology department was always overcrowded. I understand, but as a result we have a much more serious situation than it could have been. You will need prolonged treatment and possibly surgery. Surgery. The word sounded like a sentence. Margaret imagined bills that would deplete her modest savings in a matter of days. Imagined returning to an empty apartment, without means, without the ability to even buy food for Oliver. I don't have money for this, and insurance won't cover. We'll talk about that later. Dr. Cassidy made a note in the chart. Her pen moved across the paper with a quiet rustle. Something else is more important now. During the examination, we found multiple bruises on your arms and body, of varying ages. The sudden change of topic caught Margaret off guard. She felt blood rushing to her cheeks, her humiliation, her shame, her secret now exposed to strangers' eyes. I bruise easily. Age. These bruises have a characteristic shape. The doctor carefully took Margaret's arm and pointed to the clearly distinguishable finger marks on her forearm. 5 dark marks, left by a strong male hand. Someone grabbed you roughly. Repeatedly. Silence hung in the ward. Margaret didn't know where to hide from shame. She tried to turn away, but the monitor, IV and wires restricted her movements. She was a prisoner, not only of this hospital bed, but of her life. Mrs. Foster, the doctor gently continued, seeing her confusion. Margaret, I understand this is a very personal and painful question, but as a doctor, I am obliged to ask, is someone hurting you at home? Tears flowed down Margaret's cheeks. She tried to hold them back, but couldn't. Everything that had accumulated over these 2 years, fear, humiliation, loneliness, broke through like a river through a dilapidated dam. He isn't always like this, she squeezed out through her sobs, choking on her own tears. My son, he has problems. After the divorce, after his wife took their daughter, he owes money to some people. They're threatening him. She told her story in broken phrases, jumping from one thing to another, going back, getting confused in the chronology. Dr. Cassidy listened silently, not interrupting, allowing Margaret to speak her piece. When the flow of words dried up, she carefully handed her tissues. Margaret wiped her face, feeling empty and strangely relieved, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. What you're describing is called domestic abuse, and it's a crime regardless of who commits it. Husband, son, or someone else. No one has the right to treat you this way. But he's my son. My boy. He's just confused. He needs help. Perhaps, but you need protection too. The doctor made another note in the chart. Official, which would now remain there forever. Our hospital has a social worker who specializes in helping victims of domestic abuse, including the elderly. Her name is Sarah, and I would like you to talk to her. Victim. Another strange word. Margaret had never thought of herself as a victim. She had been a wife, mother, accountant, neighbor, friend. But a victim, it sounded so helpless, so final. No, don't involve anyone. This is a family matter. We'll sort it out ourselves. 2 things, Margaret. First, what's happening to you is not a family matter, but abuse that requires intervention. Second, judging by your condition, sorting it out yourselves isn't working. Your health is too severely undermined. Margaret wanted to object, but suddenly felt weakness. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she struggled against sleep. Emotional exhaustion, layered on physical weakness, was taking its toll. Rest. Dr. Cassidy adjusted the blanket, covering Margaret as if she were a child. We'll talk about this later. When she woke up the next time, the ward was in semi-darkness. Evening twilight was gathering outside the window. On the neighbouring bed lay an elderly woman reading a book by the light of a small lamp. Margaret hadn't noticed her earlier. Perhaps she had been brought in while Margaret was sleeping, or perhaps she had been too absorbed in her own problems to pay attention. Oh, you're awake! The woman put down her book and looked at Margaret with interest. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but her eyes were clear and lively. They brought you in when I was having procedures. My name is Emily. Margaret, she automatically replied. It was strange to introduce herself to someone after everything that had happened. This simple social act seemed absurd in the context of a hospital ward and a heart attack. Nice to meet you, though the circumstances aren't the best. Emily smiled and crow's feet gathered at the corners of her eyes. She looked like someone who had smiled a lot in her life. I'm a former literature teacher, and you? I worked as an accountant before retirement. Margaret felt a strange relief talking about something ordinary, about her profession, not her problems, about the past, not the present. Interesting. I was never good with numbers. I prefer words. Emily raised herself slightly on the bed, leaning on her elbow. I hope it's not too intrusive to ask, but what happened to you? You want? Heart attack. Margaret was surprised by the brevity of her own answer, but what else to say? Tell about Tyler, about years of humiliation, about how fear and stress were slowly killing her? No, that was too personal for a conversation with a stranger. Emily nodded sympathetically. Not the most pleasant experience, I know. I was here with the same diagnosis 3 months ago. Now I'm back again. Heart failure is a tricky thing. Margaret looked at her roommate with surprise. Emily appeared no older than herself, but there was some inner strength and calm in her that Margaret lacked, as if she had made peace with herself and her life, found some secret source of balance. Do you have someone coming? Family? My daughter comes every evening. And my son? Here, Emily fell silent, and a shadow passed over her face. A shadow in which Margaret recognized something familiar with horror. My son hasn't visited me for several years. He has problems with alcohol, and with money, naturally. Margaret flinched. The story seemed too familiar, too similar to her own. Did he hurt you? It happened, Emily calmly replied, as if talking about the weather, not about abuse. First with words, then in different ways. When he drank, he became aggressive, demanded money for alcohol. The last straw was when he pushed me down the stairs. I broke my wrist and 2 ribs. Margaret listened, holding her breath. What she had considered her unique, shameful secret turned out to be a universal experience. She was not alone. She was not the only mother suffering at the hands of her own child. And what did you do? I endured for a long time, thought, he's my son. Where did I go wrong? Maybe it's my fault. Emily shook her head. There was no bitterness in her voice, only a calm statement of facts. But one day, my friend said, your kindness is killing you both. And you know what? She was right. What does killing you both mean? Margaret didn't understand. Whether we indulge an addicted person, give them money, forgive humiliation and violence, we're not helping them. We're only pushing them deeper into illness. Our help is actually slow murder. Margaret frowned. This thought had never occurred to her. She had always believed she was helping Tyler, that without her support, he would be worse off. That the alternative to her help was the street, or prison, or something even worse. But if you don't help, what then? Then the person either hits rock bottom and realizes the need for treatment, or, doesn't realize it. Emily sighed. In this sigh was all the wisdom of years lived, all the difficult decisions made. In any case, continuing to support him means being an accomplice in his self-destruction. And yours too. And what about your son now? She asked quietly. The question she was afraid to ask, but even more afraid of the answer. I don't know. After I stopped giving him money and got a restraining order, he disappeared from my life. Sometimes my daughter says she saw him in town. Looks bad, but alive. Emily looked out the window at the darkening sky. I pray for him every day, but I no longer allow him to destroy my life too. How were you able to do that? Stop helping. With difficulty. Emily smiled sadly. A support group helped me. Second breath for those who have been through domestic abuse. There I realized I wasn't alone, that many go through similar experiences, and that there is a way out. Margaret felt something stir inside. Not alone. Those 2 words were like a life preserver in a sea of despair. All this time she had considered her situation unique, her shame indivisible. And it turns out, do you have the contacts for this group? She asked, surprised by her own courage. Yesterday she wouldn't have dared to ask about this. Yesterday she was sure she had to cope alone, that no one would understand, no one would help. Emily beamed. Of course. I can even take you there when we're both discharged. Believe me, Margaret, life doesn't end at 70, and it definitely shouldn't end because of someone else's problems, even if that someone is your own son. After a week in the hospital, Margaret returned home. Oliver, who greeted her, meowed pitifully. A neighbour, whom the doctors had alerted, had fed him all this time, but the cat clearly missed his owner. I missed you too, little one, Margaret whispered, scratching him behind the ear. The apartment seemed different, as if the week's absence had given her a chance to see her dwelling through the eyes of a stranger. Dust on the shelves, faded curtains, scattered things, which Tyler had evidently searched through, looking for something valuable in her absence. On the table lay a note from the neighbor. Your son came 3 times, looked irritated, left a phone number for contact. Margaret crumpled the note. The words of Dr. Cassidy and Emily wouldn't leave her head. Domestic abuse, codependency, self-destruction. Before the hospital, these words had seemed abstract from someone else's life. Now they had become reality, her reality. She went to the living room and stopped in front of the bookshelf. Behind a row of worn Agatha Christie volumes hid an old photo album. Margaret took it out and sat in the armchair. The first pages, baby Tyler, sleeping in Happy Robert's arms. 1-year-old Tyler, taking his first steps. Preschool Tyler on the beach, with a bucket and shovel. A smiling boy with dimples in his cheeks, with dreams of the future. "Where are you, my boy?" Margaret whispered, running her finger over the photograph. "What happened to you?" In the school year photos, Tyler became more serious, but the same sincerity, the same joy of life remained in his eyes. Margaret turned the page. High school, graduation, Tyler in a suit, proud with brilliant plans for the future. Margaret closed the album. She couldn't count on her son's help now. Emily is right. She herself needed help. She took out the card that Emily had given her in the hospital. Support service for elderly victims of abuse. Phone number, address, working hours. Margaret looked at this information for a long time before approaching the phone. As she dialed the number, she felt her fingers trembling. "Support service." "Second breath," answered a pleasant female voice. "How can I help?" Her voice faltered. Margaret took a deep breath. "My name is Margaret Foster. I recently had a heart attack, and I have problems with my son." "I understand, Margaret. My name is Jennifer. Would you like to come to our group meeting? We're gathering tomorrow at 2:00. A support group meeting. The thought of telling her story to strangers made her heart beat faster. But is staying alone any longer the better option? "Yes, I'll come," said Margaret, surprised at her own decision. After hanging up, she felt a strange relief, as if she had taken the first step to liberation from a cage in which she had voluntarily locked herself. The next morning, Margaret found 4 messages from Tyler on the answering machine. Each subsequent one was angrier than the previous. "Mum, it's me. Where are you? I need to talk." "Mum, call back immediately. I have serious problems." "Damn it, where are you? I need money." "If you're hiding from me, I swear you'll regret it." Instead of the usual fear and guilt, Margaret felt irritation. Even after her hospitalization, he thought only of himself. Deciding not to call her son back, she dialed another number, the social worker Sarah, whose contact information Dr. Cassidy had given her. "I'm glad you found the strength to call," said Sarah after a brief conversation. "I'm free today at 5. I can come to you if it's difficult for you to get around." At 5:00, Sarah sat at Margaret's kitchen table, making notes in a notebook. In her dark eyes was professional involvement without judgment or pity. "So, Margaret, let's discuss options. The first and most radical, a restraining order. This will prohibit your son from approaching you. For violation, arrest." Margaret winced. Tyler in jail? No, she couldn't allow that. The second option, a sheltered housing program for the elderly, temporary refuge until the situation is resolved. "Leave my home?" Margaret shook her head. "Then he'll definitely think I've abandoned him." "Margaret," Sarah said gently, "it's important to understand. You're not abandoning your son. You're saving yourself. The difference is fundamental. The third option was more acceptable. Financial counseling, changing bank details, blocking Tyler's access to her accounts. He needs to understand that he will no longer get money from you, Sarah explained. This is the first step to breaking the vicious circle. But how would Tyler react to this? He had become furious before when she couldn't give him the required amount. Think about it, said Sarah, rising. And one more thing. You mentioned a daughter, Jessica. Perhaps it's worth contacting her. Margaret sighed. 3 years without communication. She won't want to talk to me. Family is the only thing that stays with us until the end. Think about it, Sarah noted. After Sarah left, Margaret couldn't find her place. Oliver followed her, sensing her anxiety. Finally, she made up her mind. Jessica's number, strangely enough, hadn't changed in all these years. No one answered. The answering machine activated. You've reached Jessica Foster. Leave a message after the tone. A daughter's voice, so familiar and at the same time alien, made Margaret flinch. What to say? Jessie, it's Mum, she began uncertainly. I need your help. She hung up, feeling both emptied and strangely encouraged at the same time. For the first time in many years, she had done something to change the situation, instead of passively accepting it. The Second Breath support group leaflet lay on the kitchen table, an orange sheet with black text. Violence has no age. You are not alone. Margaret was about to put it in her bag before leaving for the first group meeting, but a knock at the door interrupted her preparations. She knew who it was, even before looking through the peephole. Familiar knock, sharp and insistent. Open up, Mum. I know you're home. Margaret took a deep breath, remembering Sarah's advice. Speak calmly. Don't show fear. Keep your distance. Tyler burst into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. His eyes feverishly shone. His clothes were rumpled. 3 days' stubble covered his cheeks. Where have you been? He loomed over his mother, and she involuntarily stepped back. I nearly went crazy. I came and you weren't here. No one knows anything. I was in the hospital, Tyler, Margaret answered calmly. I had a heart attack. This stopped him for a moment. He blinked as if trying to process the information. Why didn't you call me? The nurses called. You didn't come. Tyler paced around the room like a caged animal. I had problems. Serious problems. He ran his hand through his hair. I need money, Mom. Now. No, said Margaret, and this short word was harder for her than anything she had said before. What? I said no, Tyler. I can't give you money anymore. My pension barely covers my expenses, and I need funds for treatment after the attack. Tyler froze, looking at his mother incredulously. Then his gaze fell on the table where the orange leaflet lay. He grabbed it, ran his eyes over the text. What is this? His voice trembled with rage. Second Breath? Help for victims of domestic abuse? You consider yourself a victim? Me? An abuser? Ayla, listen. No, you listen. He crumpled the leaflet and threw it against the wall. You're discussing our family matters with strangers? Washing dirty linen in public? What have you told them about me? Margaret felt a lump of fear rising in her throat. But there was no way back. Sarah had warned, the first no always provokes the strongest reaction. She had to hold firm. I told the truth, Tyler, about how you take half of my pension every month, about how you yell at me, about how I fear you. Fear? Tyler laughed, but the laugh was frightening. Me? Your son? You've completely lost your mind, old woman. He began walking around the room, bumping into furniture, knocking things to the floor. I come to you for help, as a son to a mother. And you? You accuse me of some kind of abuse. Do you even understand what will happen to me if I don't get the money? And do you understand what will happen to me if I continue to give you everything I have? Margaret asked quietly. I can't do it anymore, Tyler. I can't give away half of my pension. I need medicine, food, to pay bills. I don't care about your bills, he shouted. Do you want them to kill me? Is that what you want? His gaze fell on a small ceramic vase, Robert's gift for their 15th wedding anniversary, a delicate item with a pattern of wildflowers, one of the few precious keepsakes Margaret had left. You know what? Tyler said through clenched teeth, grabbing the vase. If you don't want to help me. He forcefully threw the vase against the wall. It shattered into dozens of fragments with a deafening ring. Margaret cried out, covering her face with her hands. When she dared to look, Tyler was standing by the door, breathing heavily. You'll regret this, old woman, he threw at her. You really will. The slam of the door was so strong that a photograph fell from the wall. Margaret sank to the floor among the vase fragments. Oliver peeked out from under the sofa, where he had hidden during the argument, and cautiously approached his owner, sniffing her tear-stained face. She stroked the cat, understanding. This was just the beginning. Tyler wouldn't give up so easily, and his next visit might be even more frightening. In the following days, Margaret lived as if on a powder keg, jumping at every sound. Tyler didn't appear, but left messages on the answering machine. The support group meetings helped. Listening to the stories of other women, many of whom were her age, Margaret realized she was far from alone in her trouble. And if others could find a way out, so could she. A week after the argument, Margaret went to the bank to withdraw money to pay bills. The teller looked at her with sympathy. Mrs. Foster, you have only $7.32 in your account. That's impossible, Margaret gasped. There should be about 1,000. Yesterday there was a cash withdrawal operation, almost the entire amount. Margaret felt the room spinning before her eyes. Then who withdrew the money? Your son, Mr. Tyler Foster. He has power of attorney to manage your account. Didn't you know? Of course, she knew. She had arranged this power of attorney 2 years ago. When Tyler convinced her it would be more convenient, he could pay her bills if she ever got sick. She had never thought he would use it against her. Margaret returned home as if in a fog. In her handbag lay an empty heart medication bottle, the prescription for a new package in her pocket, but there was no more money for medicine. With trembling hands, she opened the closet, hoping to find at least something valuable that could be sold. Old jewelry had long been sold for a pittance, for the same medicines, for paying bills, for helping Tyler. Her chest began to ache again. At first not strongly, then more distinctly. Margaret knew this pain. Pills. She needed pills. She frantically searched in her bag, in drawers, on shelves. Maybe just one had been left somewhere, but in vain. The pain intensified, radiating to her left arm, rising to her neck. Margaret sank to the floor, trying to take a deep breath. She couldn't. The phone. She needed to call an ambulance. With effort, she crawled to the device, each movement difficult. 911, she croaked into the receiver. And that was the last thing she remembered before consciousness plunged into darkness. Margaret regained consciousness in the hospital. The same ward, the same smell of antiseptic, the same beeping of monitors. And the same Dr. Cassidy with a concerned expression. We've met again, Mrs. Foster. And I'm not happy about the circumstances of this meeting. Margaret tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't obey. Oh, don't strain yourself, said the doctor. You had a second attack, more severe than the first. You need surgery, Mrs. Foster. Coronary artery bypass grafting. Without it, the next attack could be the last. Surgery. Margaret knew what this meant. Huge bills that she couldn't pay. Debts that would fall on her children's shoulders after her death. I have no money, she whispered. My son. Insurance will cover part of the expenses, said Dr. Cassidy. And the rest. We'll find a solution. Right now, your life is more important. By evening, Margaret felt better. The medications had done their job. The pain had subsided. She was lying, looking out the window at the gathering twilight, when the door to her ward opened. "May I come in?" Margaret was surprised to see Emily, her former roommate. "Emily, how did you find me?" "The hospital isn't that big," smiled Emily, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I was having a routine checkup, and the nurse, remember Anna, said you were here again. I decided to stop by." This simple human care brought tears to Margaret's eyes. "How are you?" asked Emily. "What happened?" Margaret briefly told about the conflict with Tyler, how he emptied her account, and how due to the lack of medication, a new attack occurred. "My God." Emily shook her head. "And what will you do now?" "I don't know," admitted Margaret. "Doctors say I need surgery, but I can't afford it. Maybe it's better to just—" "Don't even think like that," Emily said sternly. "You have a daughter, right, Jessica? You mentioned her last time. We haven't spoken for 3 years. Then it's time to start," Emily declared resolutely. "Call her. Explain the situation." "She won't want to talk to me." Margaret shook her head. "She tried to warn me about Tyler, and I didn't listen. I accused her of jealousy, of wanting to slander her brother." "So what?" Emily shrugged. "She's your daughter, and unlike your son, she never caused you pain, right?" Margaret nodded. Jessica had indeed always been a caring daughter, until that terrible argument. "My pride—" "Pride doesn't keep you warm in old age," interrupted Emily. "Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. I also quarreled with my daughter once. We didn't speak for 5 years, and then I ended up in the hospital and thought, will I die without reconciling with the only person close to me?" Margaret was silent, digesting what she heard. "Here's the phone." Emily handed her mobile. "Call, right now, before you change your mind." Margaret slowly regained consciousness. Bright light cut her eyes and she could barely make out the outlines of the hospital ward. The beeping of medical devices, the smell of antiseptic, the hard bed, everything was familiar after the first hospitalization. But something had changed. Someone was sitting nearby, the silhouette blurred before her eyes. But Margaret didn't recognize either Tyler's massive figure or Emily's slender one. When her vision cleared, she saw a woman with chestnut hair gathered in a messy bun, a familiar face with wrinkles around the eyes that hadn't been there before. "Jessie," Margaret whispered, not believing her eyes. The woman flinched and raised her head from the book she was reading. "Mom, you're awake." There was no doubt. Before her really was Jessica, her daughter, whom she hadn't seen for so long. She looked older, more tired, but her eyes, the same grey eyes as Robert's, looked with concern and love. "Oh, how did you get here?" Margaret's voice was weak, barely audible. Jessica moved her chair closer to the bed, taking her mother's hand in hers. "The hospital called me, said you had another heart attack. I flew right away." Heart attack, bank account, Tyler. Everything suddenly returned to memory, and Margaret winced painfully. "Tyler, don't think about him now," Jessica gently interrupted. "The doctor said you need rest." "Forgive me," she managed. "Mum, I tried to call you hundreds of times," said Jessica, squeezing her hand. "Wrote letters that came by, but you didn't open the door." Margaret frowned. This couldn't be true. She would never have ignored her own daughter, not after that difficult conversation when they parted in tears and anger. She waited for Jessica to make the first move toward reconciliation. "But what are you talking about?" she asked. "I didn't receive any letters, didn't hear any calls, didn't know you came." Jessica smiled bitterly. "I thought so. It was Tyler, Mum. All these years, Tyler." "Bitty, I don't understand." "Eamon touched down the contacts, blocked my number in your phone, destroyed my letters. When I came, he told me you didn't want to see me. Too upset, too sick, or just went away for a few days." Margaret gasped. "It can't be. Tyler, her own son, her flesh and blood, couldn't deliberately separate her from her daughter. Why? For money? For control?" "How do you know?" she whispered. Jessica took out her phone. Look. She opened a messaging app and began scrolling through the screen. Dozens, if not hundreds of messages sent to Margaret's number, unread, unreceived. Mum, happy birthday. Mum, I miss you. Mum, please answer. Each message was dated, some quite recent, others a year, 2 years old. Regular, persistent attempts to connect and not a single response. And this, Jessica opened the photo gallery. Do you recognize? A photo of a girl appeared on the screen. She stood against the ocean backdrop, smiling at the camera. There was something elusive, familiar about her. The line of the chin, the shape of the eyes. Who is this? Asked Margaret, though an inner voice already suggested the answer. This is Emma, your granddaughter. She's 6. She has a granddaughter, a teenager, whose existence she wasn't even aware of. 15 years old, which means she was born shortly after Jessica moved to another state. Shortly after, the connection between them began to weaken. Why? Margaret fell silent, not knowing how to formulate all the questions raging in her head. Tyler told me you didn't want anything to do with my child, Jessica said quietly. That you called her a youthful mistake and that you weren't interested in a granddaughter from a failed marriage. Margaret made a sound like a moan. Never, never would she have said such a thing. Not about a granddaughter, not about Jessica's child, whom she loved with all her heart, despite all disagreements. That's not true, she whispered. I swear to you, I would never. I know, Mum. Jessica gently stroked her hand. Now I know. But then I believed it. He was so convincing. Said you had changed after Dad's death, become bitter, closed off. I thought you blamed me for leaving and not being there when Dad died. Tears flowed freely down Margaret's cheeks. Grief, shock, relief, all mixed into one powerful stream of emotions. Years of loneliness, years when she thought her daughter had forgotten about her, when she blamed herself for an argument that, as it turned out, never happened. Years stolen by her own son. Why? She asked through tears. Why would he do this? Jessica pressed her lips together. Classic abuser tactic. Isolate the victim. And you were the perfect victim, lonely, vulnerable, with enough money to extract. Margaret closed her eyes. Could her own son, her boy, be so calculating, so cruel? I paid for your treatment, Jessica continued, and the surgery too, and as soon as they discharge you, you'll move in with me. I have a big house, there's room, and Emma is eagerly waiting to meet her grandmother. Are you sure? Asked Margaret. After everything she had learned, the world seemed shaky, unreliable. How could she trust anyone again? Absolutely, Jessica said firmly. You're my mother, and I won't let him hurt you anymore. Jessica's house turned out to be a spacious 2-story home in a quiet suburb. A yard with bright flowers, a swing on the porch, a cozy guest room on the first floor so Margaret wouldn't have to climb stairs. Everything was thought out to the smallest detail. Emma, tall like her mother, with eyes remarkably similar to Robert's, accepted her grandmother with spontaneity and warmth. Physically, Margaret was recovering well. The surgery was successful, and although a long rehabilitation lay ahead, the doctors were optimistic, but emotional wounds healed more slowly. One evening, when Emma had already gone to bed, Margaret and Jessica sat in the living room over cups of herbal tea. The atmosphere was peaceful, conducive to an honest conversation. I'm ready to tell you, Margaret said quietly, about everything that happened these years. And she told her about Tyler's first demands after his divorce from Karen, about how requests turned into demands and demands into threats, about bruises on her wrists, about fear in her own home, about sleepless nights waiting for his visits. She told about how she split pills to make them last longer, how she gradually sold things to pay bills, how she hid from friends, ashamed of her situation. Jessica listened silently, only occasionally wiping away tears. When Margaret finished, She stood up and went to the bookshelf. I want to show you something. She took out a large photo album in a leather binding and placed it on the coffee table. Remember I said I'd tried to contact you, invited you to family celebrations? Jessica opened the album. On the first page, a photo of 2-year-old Emma with a birthday cake. In the background hung a homemade banner. Happy birthday, Emma. We love you. Mum, Uncle Tyler, and Grandma Margaret. Grandma Margaret? Margaret traced the inscription with her finger. But I wasn't there. Tyler said he gave you the invitation, but you refused to come, Jessica said bitterly. Said you weren't interested in your granddaughter. Margaret sobbed, flipping through the album. Dozens of family celebrations, school performances, summer vacations, moments she should have shared with her daughter and granddaughter, moments stolen by her own son. He came to many celebrations, Jessica continued. Always said he had passed on our invitations to you. Always returned with stories about how you were busy, unwell, or simply didn't want to see us. Jessica stood up and left the room. A minute later, she returned with a cardboard box. She opened the box. Inside, dozens of letters, some opened, some not, all addressed to Margaret from Jessica and Emma, children's drawings, birthday cards, long letters written in Jessica's neat handwriting, and also envelopes marked Return to Sender and inscribed Do Not Disturb, supposedly in Margaret's handwriting. This isn't my handwriting, Margaret whispered, examining the inscriptions. I know, Jessica nodded. He didn't even try hard to forge it. Apparently, he was confident I wouldn't check. Margaret pressed to her chest a card drawn by little Emma. To Grandma with love, read the awkward childish inscription. We should file charges against him, Jessica said firmly. This isn't just about money, Mum. It's about years of psychological abuse and destroyed relationships, about years that he stole from us. Margaret hesitated. Despite everything she had learned, the thought of filing charges against her own son. Jessica's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It's him, Jessica frowned, looking at the screen. Already the third time today. She put it on speakerphone. What do you want, Tyler? Where is she? His voice sounded simultaneously enraged and frightened. I know she's with you. Put her on. Mum is recovering from surgery. She can't be upset. You've turned her against me. Tyler's voice trembled. You've always been jealous of our bond. Always wanted to destroy... Bond? Jessica interrupted. You call that a bond? Years of manipulation and violence. Shut up. Just shut up and put Mum on the phone. Margaret nodded to Jessica. She was ready to talk. Tyler, eh? She said, taking the phone. I know everything. About the letters, about the invitations, about how for years you lied to me about Jessica and to her about me. A heavy pause hung. You chose her over me, he finally asked, and genuine pain sounded in his voice. After everything I did for you. What did you do for me? Asked Margaret. Ruined my health. Isolated me from family. Took my money. I was protecting you, he shouted. She abandoned you after Dad's death, moved to another state, leaving us to deal with debts, with the funeral, with everything. She didn't abandon me. You made me think that. You were the one intercepting our contact. You don't understand. His voice became quieter, more desperate. You don't know what you're getting into. They'll find me, and then they'll find you too. Who, Tyler, who will find you? But he had already hung up. Jessica immediately called the police and reported the threats. The next day, a restraining order was issued, prohibiting Tyler from approaching his mother and sister. But the paper protection didn't bring Margaret peace. At nights, she woke up in a cold sweat, haunted by nightmares in which Tyler burst into the house with a weapon, threatened Jessica, took her back to that empty apartment where she was slowly withering from fear and loneliness. Psychological wounds proved deeper than physical ones. She flinched at every rustle, at every phone ring, and although Jessica did everything possible to ensure safety, installed a new alarm system, hired a private security guard to patrol the area, the fear didn't let go. On the third day after issuing the restraining order, Tyler appeared at Jessica's house. Emma, returning from school, saw him first. He was standing at the gate, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. When he noticed his niece, he stepped forward, but the security guard on duty at the house blocked his way. Jessica immediately called the police. Margaret watched from the second-floor window as her son gestured, trying to prove something to the arriving officers. He seemed simultaneously aggressive and desperate. "You don't understand what you're getting into," he shouted as they put him in the police car. "They'll find me. They'll find all of you." The police detained him for violating the order but released him the next morning. First violation, without explicit threats or attempts to enter the house. Later that day, Detective Parker, an older man with tired eyes and neatly trimmed grey mustache, came to speak with Margaret and Jessica. "We conducted a search of your son's apartment," he said, placing a folder on the table, "and found something disturbing." He took out photographs. In them, Tyler stood next to a tall, well-dressed, middle-aged man, Italian suit, gold chain around his neck, expensive watch. "Do you recognize this person?" asked the detective. Margaret shook her head, but Jessica tensed. "That's Victor Morelli," she said. "I saw him in the news. He's connected to organized crime." "Absolutely correct," nodded Parker. "And it seems your son has close relations with him." He opened a folder and began to outline the facts that the police had gathered in the last few hours. "Your son divorced his wife 2 years ago after a cheating scandal. She took their daughter, demanded large alimony and full custody." The detective checked his notes. In desperation, he took a loan from Morelli to pay for an expensive family lawyer. When he couldn't repay, Morelli offered him to work it off through his accounting firm. Margaret listened, and gradually the puzzle pieces fell into place. This story explained everything. Tyler's nervousness, his constant demands for money, strange calls, visits from strangers. According to our data, Tyler didn't even understand he was helping launder money until it was too late, continued the detective. By that time, Morelli already had evidence of his involvement, and now he demands monthly insurance, threatening prison, or something worse. "My God," whispered Margaret. Now she understood. One mistake, an affair with a colleague, destroyed Tyler's family. Trying to maintain a connection with his daughter, he got involved with the criminal world and sank so deep that he could no longer get out on his own. So the money he took from her didn't go to drugs, as she thought. It went to Morelli. An endless tribute that would never pay off the main debt. "But that's no excuse," Jessica said harshly, as if reading her mother's thoughts. "He cheated on his wife, destroyed his family, and then got involved with the mafia and dragged you into it. That's no excuse." "Not an excuse," agreed the detective, "but an explanation, and possibly the key to solving the problem." In the following days, Margaret continued to attend the Second Breath support group. There she found understanding that she so badly needed before. The women listened to her story without judgment, shared their own experiences, gave practical advice. And there she met Michael, an elderly lawyer who specialized in defending victims of domestic abuse. He often consulted group participants for free. After one of the meetings, Margaret told him about the situation with Tyler and Morelli. "This is serious," said Michael after listening to her. "But there might be a way out. Your son needs not only financial, but also legal help. If he agrees to testify against Morelli, the prosecution might offer immunity." "Testify?" Margaret asked. "Against Morelli. But that's dangerous." "There's a witness protection program," Michael explained. "If Tyler's information helps put Morelli away, the feds will provide him with a new identity, a new place to live, a new life." "A new life?" Margaret pondered. Perhaps this is exactly what our son needs, a chance to start with a clean slate, away from debts, threats, and past mistakes. Can you help us? She asked. I can contact the federal prosecutor, Michael nodded. But first, we need to talk to your son. Nothing will work without his consent. He won't talk to me, Margaret said sadly. Not after what happened. Sometimes, Michael gently replied. A person is ready to hear the truth only when there's nothing left to lose. Perhaps your son has finally reached that point. That same evening, Michael made several calls, and the next morning they already had a meeting with the federal prosecutor. He carefully listened to Margaret's story and studied the documents provided by Detective Parker. Borelli has been on our radar for a long time, said the prosecutor, but he's cautious and we have little direct evidence. If your son really worked for his accounting firm and has access to documents, his testimony could be invaluable. What needs to be done? Asked Margaret. We'll arrange a safe meeting with your son. If he agrees to cooperate, we'll immediately take him under protection, and you too if necessary. Michael volunteered to accompany Margaret to the meeting with the feds and Tyler. On the way, he talked about the legal aspects of the Witness Protection Program, what to expect, questions to ask. The Witness Protection Program isn't a vacation at a resort, he warned. It's a complete change of identity, breaking all previous ties. But sometimes it's the only chance to start life anew, and for your son, it seems that's the case. The thin folder on the coffee table in Jessica's living room gradually turned into a hefty stack of documents. Bank statements, receipts, phone records, neighbors' testimonies, photos of bruises, evidence of Tyler's financial abuse accumulated in this folder like puzzle pieces, forming a distressing picture of what Margaret had endured. Are you sure you want to continue? Jessica asked each time she saw her mother going through these papers. This is hard for you. Hard? Not the word. Each document was a reminder of years of fear and humiliation, but Margaret just nodded and continued methodically sorting the materials. She needed to go through this, needed to see the whole truth, without any embellishment or self-deception. In the evenings, she leafed through the photo album, studying pictures where she was absent. Birthdays, school concerts, Christmas dinners. Events she didn't even know about. This pain was sharper than physical, but strangely, it was this pain that drove Margaret forward. Physically, she was recovering well. Months of rehabilitation, first in the hospital, then outpatient, gradually restored her strength. Morning exercises, sessions with a physiotherapist, proper nutrition. All this was part of a new lifestyle. Jessica insisted on the best treatment local specialists could offer, and now Margaret felt better than she had for many years before. Weekly, she met with a psychologist who helped her sort out complicated feelings toward her son. Anger, resentment, disappointment, intertwined with maternal love, with the desire to protect, to save from problems. These are normal, healthy emotions, said Dr. Nash, when Margaret admitted that despite everything Tyler had done, she still loved him and worried about his fate. They don't negate the fact that you need to protect yourself. Love and boundaries can coexist. The most unexpected support turned out to be Elizabeth, Jessica's new neighbor, a 70-year-old widow who moved to their street 3 months ago. She lived across the road, in a small but cozy house with a meticulously maintained garden. Their first meeting happened by chance. Margaret went out on the porch to get some fresh air and saw an elderly woman struggling to unload groceries from a taxi. Without thinking, she crossed the road to help. "Oh, thank you, dear." Elizabeth smiled, and her face, dotted with fine wrinkles, seemed to light up from within. "My knees today decided they no longer want to obey me." They got to talking while arranging the purchases. Elizabeth turned out to be a former music teacher, a widow like Margaret, but what surprised her most, she too had experienced domestic abuse from her own son. 10 years of nightmare, she said without drama when Margaret, after several meetings, shared her story. He became addicted to gambling, then to alcohol. swore he would change, that it was the last time, but the last time repeated again and again. "How did you cope?" asked Margaret. "With help," Elizabeth shrugged. "I couldn't have done it alone. I was helped by other elderly women from my community who had gone through similar experiences. Only when I stopped hiding from people, ashamed of my own situation, was I able to find support." Elizabeth introduced Margaret to a circle of local retirees, active, friendly, many of whom had survived family tragedies but found the strength to move on. For the first time in many years, Margaret felt part of a community. She made new friends with whom she could go to the theatre, play bridge, just chat over a cup of tea. This sense of belonging gave her strength to prepare for the upcoming trial, which promised to be long and exhausting. She and Jessica consulted with lawyers, explored options for compensation, spoke with bank representatives about fraudulent operations. On Dr. Nash's advice, Margaret began keeping a journal. Every evening she wrote down thoughts, feelings, memories, not so much for future generations as for her own healing. Gradually, pouring out emotions accumulated over years onto paper. She felt inner strength returning. "Today I managed to walk the entire block without stopping," she wrote. "I no longer feel fragile or helpless. There is strength in me that Tyler couldn't break, no matter how hard he tried." Sometimes she wrote about her anxieties, about how she feared that Tyler would forever remain trapped in his dependency on Morelli, and about her guilt for not noticing how her son was gradually sinking into this nightmare. "If I had been more attentive," she wrote, "I would have noticed the signs earlier. If I had been stronger, I could have resisted his manipulations. If I had been wiser," but with each day, these "if only" became quieter, giving way to acceptance of what had happened and determination to move forward, regardless of the court's outcome. Michael, the lawyer whom Margaret met in the support group, became the liaison between their family and the police. It was he who reported that federal agents were developing an operation to catch Morelli with Tyler's help. Tyler agreed to cooperate, Michael explained during one of the meetings. The feds offered him a deal, his testimony against Morelli in exchange for immunity from prosecution. "He really agreed?" Jessica asked with disbelief. "After everything he said?" "He didn't have much choice," Michael shrugged. "With the evidence we gathered, he was facing serious time for financial fraud. Not to mention that Morelli would sooner or later realize the money had dried up, and then—" He paused significantly. "Now what?" asked Margaret, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. "Now detectives are developing an operation," Michael replied. "They want to catch Morelli red-handed while receiving money. It's a complex operation requiring careful preparation. But if all goes smoothly, Morelli will go behind bars for many years, and Tyler will get a chance to start a new life in the witness protection program." A month passed, filled with anticipation and nervous tension. Tyler didn't make contact. This was part of the plan. But Margaret often thought about him, trying to imagine what he was feeling now, knowing that something was about to happen that would change his life forever. Fear? Relief? Remorse? The call came late morning when she was helping Emma with a history homework assignment. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice too familiar. "I'll come by in the evening for the money. Don't dare go anywhere." Tyler's voice sounded sharp, but Margaret caught notes of fear and tension in it. She didn't immediately understand what was happening, but then it dawned. This was part of the operation. Tyler had to maintain the appearance of payments to avoid raising Morelli's suspicions. "All right, I'll be waiting," she said as calmly as possible. "When approximately will you arrive?" "At 7, he answered, "and prepare cash, no checks." That night, the conversation was over. Margaret looked at Emma's worried face. "Everything's fine, dear," she tried to smile. "Uncle Tyler, he's helping the police." Jessica quickly entered the room, alarmed by the call. "You're not going," she said firmly when Margaret explained the situation. "It's too dangerous, Mum. Let the police handle it themselves." "But the plan is based on me being there," Margaret objected. "If I don't show up, Morelli might suspect something. And you're willing to risk your life for Tyler after everything he did?" Margaret thought. She wasn't doing this for Tyler. She was doing it for justice, for herself, for dozens of other victims of Morelli whom she didn't know, but whose fates depended on the success of this operation. "I have to do this," she said quietly but firmly. Jessica didn't give in easily. She contacted Detective Parker, insisting on additional security. "It's too dangerous," she repeated. "Morelli isn't the type to surrender without a fight." Eventually, a compromise was reached. Margaret would go to her old apartment, but police officers and federal agents would already be waiting there. Michael, as her lawyer, would also be present. "Promise me you'll be careful," said Jessica, hugging her mother before departure, "and leave immediately if you sense danger." "I promise," Margaret hugged her daughter back tightly. "Everything will be fine." The apartment where she had lived for so many years now seemed alien and empty. Someone, probably Jessica, had thoughtfully tidied up there, dusted, watered the plants. But it was no longer home. Home was now where Jessica and Emma were. "Mom," his voice broke. "I know you can never forgive me, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I ruined everything myself." He spoke disjointedly, often stopping, but Margaret didn't interrupt him. For the first time in many years, Tyler was being honest with her. "Hamill's stupid fling with Melissa from marketing. We were working on a project late. There was a bottle of wine." He shook his head. "Karen found out. That's when everything collapsed. She took Lily, and the court took her side. Full custody with the mother, me, 2 weekends a month, and alimony I could barely afford." Margaret listened, hands clasped on her knees. She remembered that period. Tyler never directly said what happened, but she guessed the divorce was painful. "I needed money for a lawyer," Tyler continued, looking at the floor, "just to be able to see my daughter on weekends, but banks refused credit due to a damaged credit score." He paused, as if gathering strength for the hardest part. "In the bar, where I was getting drunk after another rejection, I met a man. He said he knew someone who could help. Without unnecessary questions, without credit history checks. That's how I met Morelli." Tyler spoke about how Morelli offered a quick solution, how he just had to sign accounting documents in exchange for a small loan, how when it came time to repay the debt, the amount suddenly tripled, how Morelli showed him documents proving that Tyler was involved in money laundering. And then this nightmare began. Tyler ran his hands through his hair. Monthly payments, threats, fear. I couldn't get out. "When didn't you go to the police?" Margaret asked quietly. "He threatened not just me." Tyler looked at his mother for the first time. "He knew about you, about Jessica, knew where you lived, what you did. He had his people everywhere." "But why didn't you tell me the truth?" Tears stood in Margaret's eyes. "I thought you were just using me, possibly for drugs, that you didn't care." "No," he sharply interrupted. "Never. I was afraid they would hurt you or Jessica if they found out someone else knew. And I was ashamed, Mum. Ashamed of my weakness, my mistakes, that I lost my family, daughter, reputation. It was easier to seem like a jerk than to admit complete failure." Margaret was silent, processing her son's revelations. These explanations didn't erase years of fear and manipulation, didn't justify bruises on her arms, stolen pension, stolen relationships with her daughter and granddaughter. "And Jessica," she finally asked, "why did you destroy my relationship with her?" Tyler lowered his head even more. "Jessica always saw right through me," he said, quietly. Even as a child. She noticed things that neither you nor Dad saw. When everything started with Morelli, she immediately realized something was wrong, started asking questions. I was afraid she would uncover the truth. And I wanted you to depend only on me, to make it easier to get money. These words hit Margaret harder than all the previous ones. To deliberately separate a mother from her granddaughter. Tyler seemed to read her thoughts. I turned into a monster, he whispered, and his shoulders shook with restrained sobs, into someone I would have been afraid of before. And I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mum. I know some things are impossible to forgive. Margaret sat motionless, looking at the broken man before her. Not a monster, just a person who made terrible mistakes and was now paying for them. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, she finally said. But I'll try to understand, and I'll be here while you recover. When Margaret returned home, Jessica was waiting for her with anxiety in her eyes. How is he? She asked neutrally. Margaret told her about the conversation with Tyler. Jessica listened silently, and her face expressed nothing. He has destroyed so many lives, she finally said bitterly. His own, Karen's, Lily's, yours, mine. Emma didn't know her grandmother for 15 years. You didn't see your granddaughter grow up. And all because of what? His inability to keep his pants zipped. His pride not allowing him to admit failure. She shook her head. You betrayed your wife, your daughter, your mother, and even me. Though I did nothing wrong to you. How many lives must be destroyed because of your irresponsibility? Margaret didn't argue with her daughter. Jessica had every right to be angry. But secretly, she hoped that over time this anger would subside. Tyler began a long path to rehabilitation. The psychiatric ward was replaced by a specialized center for people with traumatic disorders, medications, therapy, group sessions. All this became part of his new life. Margaret visited him once a week. At first, these visits were difficult for her. Too many unresolved emotional knots remained between them, but gradually she noticed changes. Tyler became calmer, learned to talk about his feelings without falling into hysterics, became more open and honest. Jessica never visited her brother. She didn't believe in his reformation, considering that his remorse was caused only by fear of consequences, not by sincere understanding of the harm caused. As soon as he feels better, he'll return to his old habits, she said. People don't change. Margaret didn't argue, but deep down she believed. People do change, if they truly want to. And Tyler, it seemed, wanted to. At Dr. Nash's insistence, Margaret enrolled in family therapy with Tyler and later with Jessica as well. These sessions were emotionally draining but necessary. They uncovered old wounds whose existence Margaret hadn't even suspected. In one such session, a shocking truth about Robert emerged. It turned out that behind the facade of the perfect husband and father hid a man who wasn't above physical punishment. Tyler confessed that his father regularly beat him for any transgression. Bad grades, tardiness, disobedience. He never touched you, Mum, said Tyler, and rarely raised a hand to Jessica. But with me, he said he was making a man out of me, that weaklings don't survive in this world. Margaret was stunned. How could she not have noticed? How could she have lived with a man for so many years and not seen this side of him? He threatened that if I complained to you, I would regret it, Tyler continued, and I believed him. I learned to hide bruises, learnt not to cry, learnt to hide my feelings. Jessica, present at the session, confirmed his words. I saw it several times, she said quietly. But he made me swear I would never tell you, said it would break your heart and destroy the family. Margaret felt the ground disappearing from under her feet. Her entire life, all memories of a happy marriage with Robert, now appeared in a different light. The man she loved, whom she mourned, was an abuser. And she didn't notice, didn't protect her own children. I'm not saying this to justify myself, said Tyler. No childhood excuses what I did to you. But maybe it helps understand why I am the way I am. Why I don't know how to deal with problems. Why I don't know how to talk about my feelings. Deep down, Margaret felt guilty for being blind to her family's problems, for not noticing her children's suffering, for idealizing her husband, ignoring signs that probably were there. But the psychologist said that self-flagellation wouldn't fix anything, that it was more important to focus on healing her own and her children's, on moving forward, not on dwelling on past mistakes. The trial against Morelli was in full swing. Tyler, by then discharged from the rehabilitation center, gave testimony, presented evidence, participated in identifications. His role in the case was key. "There's a place for you in the witness protection program," said Michael when they met in his office. "New identity, new place of residence, financial support for the initial period." Tyler was included in the program immediately after giving the main testimony against Morelli. It was too dangerous to leave him unprotected. The mobster had connections even in prison, and revenge against prosecution witnesses was a matter of honor. The surprise was the offer to include Margaret, Jessica, and Emma in the program as well. "They know who you are," explained Federal Agent Donovan, who was overseeing their case. "They know where you live. And although they will try to strike primarily at Tyler, no one can guarantee the safety of the entire family." It was a difficult decision. Leave their past life, friends, work, school. Start with a clean slate in a completely new place, under new names. Erase everything that was before from their biography. Jessica hesitated. Emma cried, not wanting to part with friends and school. Margaret understood their doubts. At their age, everything seemed so important, so permanent. But she also understood safety is more important. "What if this is our chance?" she said one evening when they sat in the living room discussing the federal offer. "A chance to start anew without the burden of past mistakes, without Morelli's shadow over us, without fear that someone will knock on the door demanding money." Jessica was silent for a long time, looking at Emma sleeping on the sofa. "I want her to be safe," she finally said, "to not look over her shoulder for the rest of her life." "Maybe you're right. Maybe this really is a chance." A small town in Oregon greeted them with pouring rain and coolness. 3 houses on a quiet street lined with maple trees. 3 new lives with 3 new names. The legend for neighbors. A widowed mother moved closer to her daughter and granddaughter after her husband's death. The son wasn't mentioned in this legend, but in reality, he existed, now under the name George Baker, in a neighboring town, an hour's drive away. "In our legend, we've always been a close family," Margaret remarked once, sorting through new documents. "Sometimes I want to believe it was really like that." Tyler was undergoing mandatory psychological rehabilitation, coping with post-traumatic stress. He worked in the local library, a quiet, peaceful job giving him a chance to reflect on life and draw conclusions. Jessica, now Sarah, found work at a medical center, using her experience as a nurse. Gradually, very slowly, with caution and distrust, she began to restore her relationship with her brother. Not immediately, not easily, but the process was happening. Emma adapted to the new life faster than anyone. Found friends at school, took up swimming, filled the house with laughter and noise that had been so lacking before. "We need to learn to be a real family," Emma said one evening at dinner. "Maybe we could have family evenings, once a week, on Sundays, with games, movies." She hesitated. "And maybe invite Uncle Ty. Margaret saw how Jessica tensed at the mention of her brother. But to her surprise, her daughter slowly nodded. "Maybe that's a good idea," she said. "Let's try." Margaret woke up on her 73rd birthday with an unexpected feeling of peace. A year in a new home with a new name, with a new life, taught her to value each day. Every moment without fear, every evening without anxious waiting for a call or knock at the door, was a small victory. Jessica insisted on a small celebration, a home-cooked dinner, a couple of friends from town whom they had made over the year. The world was no longer limited to apartment walls. "Everything ready?" Emma peeked out from the kitchen, where she and Jessica were preparing dinner. "Guests will be here soon." Margaret smiled, arranging cutlery. Not everything was perfect in their new life. Sometimes nostalgia for the past, for friends left in another city, washed over her. Sometimes Morelli's shadow still appeared in nightmares. But now there was hope. There was a way forward. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. Margaret opened it, expecting to see Elizabeth and her husband, their new friends and neighbours. But on the threshold stood Tyler, now known as Michael, with a small gift in his hands and a modest bouquet of wild flowers. "Happy birthday," he said quietly. "I hope I'm not late." Margaret let him into the house and he walked into the living room, where guests had already gathered at the table. Tyler froze in the doorway, seeing everyone assembled there. The last time they were together, as a whole family, was before all these events. Before Morelli, before arrests and the protection program. He was still not used to seeing them together, in safety, without the shadow of fear. This could be read in his gaze. Surprise, uncertainty, hope. "I invited him," said Margaret, gently pushing her son into the room. "Now we can be a family without fear and lies." The guests, not knowing their history, simply smiled, seeing the family reunion. Jessica froze for a moment. Then, clearly overcoming herself, approached her brother and awkwardly but sincerely hugged him. "You're not alone with this anymore," she said quietly, and in these simple words was more acceptance than in all the conversations over the past year. Emma, always sensing the mood of the room, decided to lighten the atmosphere. She approached her uncle with a cake on which candles burned. "Make a wish with Grandma," she smiled. Tyler looked at Margaret, and in his eyes she saw what she had been seeking all these months. A son. Just a son who, despite all his mistakes, still remained her child. She closed her eyes and made a wish that this slow, uncertain path to healing would continue, that it would become a little easier with each day, that one day fear and pain would completely disappear, leaving room only for love and acceptance. She understood. Real strength isn't in forgiving the past, but in creating a new future where there's no place for blackmail, lies, and fear. Day by day, step by step, they were building this new world, and today she was grateful for each such small step. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a like and leave a comment below.